earlier on in headlines, and then we analyze it. We have our guests here who are going to be doing justice to the stories this morning. We have Cheta with us. Good morning, Cheta.
Good morning.
Good morning, Cheta. Cheta is at Chester on Twitter. You can find him there, or if you'd like to engage him one-on-one for his comments, you can go to his Twitter page. We also have with us here Tunde Okufi. Good morning, Tunde.
Morning, Ayo. Morning, Lagos.
Good morning. Now, Tunde is at Big Cuffs on Twitter. You can also send him a message or follow him there for more. And then we have Uade. Good morning, Uade.
Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Lagos.
Good morning. Uade is at Reink Niger 2017 on Twitter as well. Now, you can also follow us on Twitter at Smooth981FM and use the hashtag FreshlyPress981 to send your messages to us this morning.
On YouTube, we're at Smooth981FM Lagos. You can leave a comment using the live chat button there. And you can also send messages through WhatsApp. That's a major mode of communication. WhatsApp number is 0809-444-0981.
All right, we'll go straight into our first story for this morning. And major shake-up as Army redeploys 21 generals. This is from the Punch newspaper. Cheta, I'll let you start this morning. Now, we have a report here that the redeployment of no fewer than 21 general officers commanding brigade commanders and others, saying the action is for greater efficiency. What's your take on this?
My criticism really is not of the deployment, it's of the story itself. It tells us a lot about the health of the country's security architecture. That's what should otherwise be routine military postings are making the pages of newspapers, national news. Now, top line commanding officers in the army, yes, we should know. If there's a new chief of army staff, which there should be soon enough, we should know. The heads of the different operations that the military is involved in, and at the moment the military is involved in 8. Lafayette Dole, Sharon Daji, Awase, Sherin Habi, Harbin Kunama, Crocodile Smile, and Dokaji.
Okay.
Now, if they have new heads, we should know.
Yes.
But operational rotations, which are routine, I don't understand why it's making the pages of newspapers, and I'll be glad if someone can explain.
No, it's important for us to be informed. Whether it's important or on the scale of importance for you, it's not very high. Nevertheless, we must
so what
also
are you
report
doing
on
with
this. It's information.
I mean, I see where Cheta is coming from, because it seems as if that there's an underlying move that has been made, because most of the papers are carrying that same caption. They just shake up.
Like I said, I started it. It tells a lot about the health of our security architecture and the health of these are routine. I mean, redeploying the commanders of 33 brigades, 23 brigades, 34 brigades, 16 brigades, 14 brigades. I mean, come on. But because and it's a holdover from the military era, when people were moved, officers were moved when somebody was suspecting something. So again, like I said, the bigger story here is that indicator that not all is well with our mindsets.
Okay. So,
all right.
So you just quickly,
Okay,
you know, when you said in the military era, they were moved around when there was a worry that something was happening. In the civilian era, however, postings became benefits, right? So when shakings happen and people's benefits are affected, it makes news. Remember, these guys also have friends in the press, and then they start to put these out, like when we said they're not happening because someone is touching somebody's pocket.
Again, making my point that there's something wrong with our minds.
There's an
Absolutely.
All
right, we'll still be following that up. If anything comes up, we'll be sure to let you or to keep you informed, Lagos. Now, from Thisday newspaper, we have good news here from the Ministry of Environment. World Bank commends Nigeria's Erosion Watershed Management Project. They've said that would actually be used as a case study for the wider African front when it comes to dealing with the environment. What's your take on this?
Fantastic news. Great news for Nigeria. It still goes to show you that we have great people in Nigeria.
Yes, and great ministries in the federal government.
That work.
That
work.
That
efficient.
People who know what they need to do. People who understand what project management is all about and manage it effectively and efficiently. Another thing for me is the second part of it is where they say they are going to be asking for more money from government. So a government that hasn't been funding its projects efficiently. One of the things I would say is what they should look at is how they can bring in the private sector and work towards the sustainable development goals in partnering with some of those things. That becomes easier access to funds,
Funds,
and
yeah.
also have more people who understand project management to do some of those things.
Yeah, just a quick question, Uade. Are they commending the thought, the idea, or the execution of the project?
The
The
execution.
The
execution.
execution. So it's been executed very well.
Yes,
Yes.
that's what
However-
according to the World Bank.
according to the World Bank.
It's important to actually note that it is a partnership with the Ministry of Environment and the World Bank.
the
So
World Bank.
so far, the World Bank has funded the project,
Okay.
and they've
And now
monitored
they're-
it as
okay.
well. So
Monitored it.
perhaps the fact that we've
That's
had
that's
it,
what- that's one of the
I
reasons I
see.
was saying that the government
So
never funds this back.
Nigerians can act well when
we
you
have
know,
when
there's
when you
proper
have,
oversight.
when you have,
When
you
there's
have
proper
big-
oversight.
Yes.
Well, it's basic human behavior. When you don't monitor, when there's no
There's no oversight.
when there's no punishment
Yeah, when there are no
Consequence.
for
oversight.
bad behavior, consequences
Consequences.
involved, then
Yeah.
people do anyhow then.
All right.
That's the story of Nigeria.
Now, just to let people know that the Federal Ministry of Environment, in collaboration with the World Bank and its partner agencies, had designed this project to address on a multidimensional scale the menace of gully erosion in the southeast as well as land degradation in the north. And so far, the results have been fantastic. But let's see what happens with the funding that they're looking for if they do get it. But it's worthy of note that in the federal budgetary allocation, it has been reflected there.
Yeah, it's one thing to reflect, it's another thing to actually execute the funding.
And all right.
And Ibrahim sent in a reaction to the first story, talking about the military shakeup or the army shakeup. He said, well, it's making the news because it has been politicized. Cheta's question should be why it is being politicized, as it's supposed to be the norm. And still buttressing your points, Cheta. And then Felix Ayano says there's nothing wrong with the press being informed during military redeployments. It happens even in the United States.
Okay,
Really?
all right. I'll move on to this story very quickly. Now, this is a special report by Premium Times, and it's very worrying. The headline says Lagos ramshackle school where hoodlums defecate in classrooms. Tunde, this isn't just about this school, the Methodist Primary School Ewutuntun in Oshodi, Lagos State. It actually is a reflection of public schools in Nigeria. Can you please take us through this report?
Probably society has, a lack of planning. I'll get to that in a minute. So now, I guess the recent school collapse in Lagos Island is putting a lot of focus on education again, and we're seeing special reports and things of that nature. But you're absolutely right. This is nothing. It's nothing specific to this Methodist school alone. Literally every public school in the state suffers from the same thing. I had and similar to this. This school started. This was a faith-based school originally, run by the Methodist Church.
Yeah.
I remember that at the same time, the Lagos State government took over all these schools and just ran them into the ground because they couldn't manage them. Bottom line. Now, at some point in return to government, some of those schools, or at least some of those religious institutions asked for their schools back. I guess the Methodist Church hasn't done that in this case, because if you look at some of the other churches, they've asked for their schools back.
Yes.
And I attended one of those schools that were sort of taken back, but I attended it during the period when it was hands off government, right? So I know, and however,
When it was hands off.
when it was hands off, absolutely. However, it's it's an all boys school, and I'm third generation person to attend that school. So it's a bit difficult to explain at home that look, the school that you guys went to that was really good is no longer the same thing, right? It was cases of broken down classrooms, gaps in sessions, and the classrooms being used, unfortunately, in some cases for as like you say, to defecate because it had been run down. When I'd done my time anyway, the government took it back, and the guys after me have had a good time. Bottom line, it points to the fact that the government hasn't had a good record at managing these schools because of lack of funds and mismanagement of the funds they have.
Now, it's important to mention lack of funds, because in his response, the SUBEB official, who is actually who spoke on behalf of SUBEB, that's the State University Basic Education Board, Mr. Ikoyi, had talked about the fact that the primary reason for this dilapidated building is funding.
Absolutely.
Lack of funding in Lagos State. But he also mentioned something interesting, that the federal government releases allocation to basic education and the state matches it. However, Lagos State has not been able to match it to the extent where they can adequately look after schools in Lagos.
Well, okay, that's the point I was going to get to. Lagos State actually is one of the 13 states that has matched that counterpart funding, right? And they've accessed 1.3 billion. Well, 13 of all our states
But
it's
if
not,
they matched it, how come this school is still like this?
because
in
not
Lagos
that's
State?
that's my final point, in that no matter how much funding you get, this is a case of a lack of national thinking. Over the last, I looked at data that I'm planning. I looked at data that showed that our population has grown by near 70% in the last 20 or 30 years. That's a lack of national thinking and planning, right? Our population has exploded. We've done nothing about it. In fact, we don't even know that it's exploding, literally. Do you understand? We're growing people faster than our GDP and our economy can grow. For obviously for different reasons, the economy can grow quicker. But we're birthing kids. When you don't grow revenue, you control costs. Our population growing at the rate that it's growing is a cost. It's a cost that we can't afford, right? The government simply cannot provide enough quality schools for the number of at the rate at which we're birthing kids, right? So no matter how much money is thrown at it, even if there was no corruption, we would have a problem. Now add corruption to it and we have this disaster that's on our hands, right? That's the issue.
A second issue is the fact that our education spending is very
minimal,
heavy when it comes to, so we spend more on the universities and NYSC. So NYSC budget alone is more than the budget of primary and secondary together,
which is a misnomer.
Now by the time so where we miss it is that by the time the students get to the universities, they're already damaged. There's nothing. I mean, even if you carry coconda and open their head to put knowledge inside, it will not stay. The most important part of education is primary. We just ignore it.
The Millennium Development Goals, one of which is at the time was basic education, and now the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's the reason why UBEC was created. It's interesting to see that more attention is placed, or given to the university education. And when at foundation level you cannot read, you cannot write, literacy is a problem
what
in
you
Nigeria.
build on. I mean, when the foundations are wrong, what you build on.
All right, we have a message from Shegun on WhatsApp. He says, you would have thought civilians would run education and healthcare very well, but I have to say that politicians in the last 20 years have let us down. The military have their faults, but how did they give us better education and infrastructure which the civilians can't even maintain?
Shagun, that's wrong. The military gave us really bad education.
Terrible,
what we had was
terrible
a
education
from the colonial era. That's just the fact.
All right, let's move on.
All right, let's move on to this story here from the Vanguard. Again, talking about funds and lack of funding, lack of planning, minimum wage, federal government in dilemma over inadequate budgetary allocation. Now, the Vanguard has released some facts about this. In fact, they gathered that between 200 billion naira and 300 billion naira is required annually to handle the payment of the new 30,000 naira minimum wage. Cheta?
Well, the Vanguard is actually factually incorrect on that because they failed to take one thing into consideration. When we increase minimum wage in this country, we tend to increase across board. It's not, we don't do graduated increments. Business, they did an analysis of what a new minimum wage based on 30,000 would cost the country, and this was they did this analysis in October of last year, and it came to 1.25 trillion extra per year. Now, a few figures, because I think these figures are important. All revenues have fallen by 36% in the last 6 years, and this is despite government's promises to beef up non-oil revenues. Non-oil revenues have risen by just 340 billion naira in 6 years. 340 billion naira at current exchange rates is $950 million. It's important to note that.
Yes.
Number two, yesterday the Punch reported that we have 30 unsold oil cargoes from the April. They're just floating around in the ocean. Nobody's buying. So it helps to put the whole oil revenue decline in perspective. As revenue has declined, government spending has skyrocketed. Over the last 4 years, government expenditure has gone up by a factor of 56%. And in short, between 2016 and 2017 alone, government expenditure went up by 26%. Debt servicing is now 67% of revenue. The new minimum wage, as I said, if implemented across board, will add 1.25 trillion to the wage bill. If President Buhari's own proposal, which is a wage increase for the lowest of the low, goes through, I doubt that will go through. And the reason I doubt it will is that everybody that is interested is gathering their cutlery for this new minimum wage increase. So if he says okay, it is just for for the lowest of
Lowest,
the low.
yeah.
Those higher up guys in the civil service, they will resist it. There's going
Right.
to be a problem. So I don't know, because this joins into what Tunde talked about in the last story: declining revenues, declining planning, a ballooning population.
Increasing costs.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Cheta. You can get more details of that story in the Vanguard newspaper.
All right, let's move on to the new Telegraph for the next story. Lagos State government yesterday took possession of the site of the building. That was 2 days ago, actually. Took possession of the site of the building, which collapsed on Wednesday morning, killing pupils and other occupants. Now, Wade, in this story, we're saying that the first move that was made by the Ministry of Fiscal Planning and Urban Development was to demolish some buildings that were marked for demolition since 2018, and even before that. We see that government is taking steps which should have been preventive. Would have preempted this.
Playing to the gallery. Let me start with that. One of the biggest things and one of the most difficult things to do in Lagos is to ask the government to demolish your house.
Why?
Because it's more expensive. The process of getting the government to demolish your house is even more strenuous than them giving you a permit to build a house.
Well, shouldn't that be a normal occurrence? If your building is marked for demolition, I understand that they will give you some time to...
Personally, I've gone through this experience, so that's why I can tell you.
It's more expensive because of corruption. I know people
Yes.
knock down buildings for...
That's what I'm saying.
The amount.
So
cheap.
the process of actually knocking down the building is more difficult than you getting a permit to build a building because of the level of corruption within the system. And so even if I have a defected building that I want to knock down, man, I would probably just continue to live in it until the day it falls down. Because if it falls down, it's the same thing. The government will take it over and own it.
So in the coming days, how do you see this activity extending to other parts of Lagos, not
Well,
just the Lagos Island?
This is not the first time. Even new buildings that have collapsed and they've not taken over other buildings that are meant to have been taken over all these years. If you go into Lagos Island, not just Lagos Island, go into Butimeta, go into Soliri, there are quite a number of buildings that should be marked for demolition. Now, like I said, playing to the gallery, because the building has fallen down. Now you quickly take over 5 and say you're bringing them down. All the other ones, what are the people in these ministries doing? What is the level of transparency in showing that these things have actually been in place for long?
So one thing that worries me, and gentlemen, please feel free to weigh in, is the fact that, okay, now we're moving to the conversation of the buildings have been demolished. The talk of the casualties is still very fresh in our minds. Are we going to let this die out? Is this conversation going to end now, or are we going to carry on with making sure that
I think that's the subject of another story upcoming up
Saturday.
perhaps. Saturday.
Oh, you
Allow
mean
us
the
move
election
around.
day?
No. Rerun, that's for one.
Run off
I'm just trying to be
reruns.
funny, because are you trying to say that we'll forget it by Saturday?
Interesting. Thank you. Wade.
That's Saturday is fine, Cheta.
Let's move on to this next conversation. We actually have a message on WhatsApp.
Modupe here says Nigeria is a classic example of the fact that simply throwing money at problems is not a solution. Without proper planning and allocation of resources, we will always have a problem. Both Ghana with less resources and India with a larger population have managed their basic educational systems well. Nigeria doesn't have an excuse. By the way, how is NYSC counted as part of the educational budget?
Help me out.
And here on Twitter, Tony sends in this one. Tony Ebo said, "Do not tell me it's population growth. If you say the schools are full, I would understand. Can you mention a few that are properly equipped to begin with?" Ask these questions every day. Let's move on to this next story from Premium Times. I'll come to you today for the analysis of this story. The Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project they've urged the federal government and the governments precisely of Lagos and Oyo states to take immediate action to address the numerous ongoing human rights impact of the deadly and catastrophic building collapse in their respective states, saying that they are highly concerned that responses so far by the governments of these states have been insufficient to deal with massive extent of human cost of the incidents.
Okay, so once again, SERAP is they haven't brought any cases forward this time, but it's an organization I admire a lot for what they do, and this is a pertinent issue, and I do hope. Clearly, they have you know, what you were worrying, what you mentioned about how long will this stay in the memory.
Yes.
You know, they make it their business to stay in the memory.
They keep us in
as
check.
They keep us in check,
Yeah.
while the rest of us will eventually move on. Unfortunately, now they focus this statement on Lagos and Ibadan, and it seems that according to the shared numbers, that Lagos and Oyo seem to have the highest rate of collapsed buildings. Now that might have multiple implications and multiple reasons why that's the case. But SERAP's point is that, look, beyond the properties, the loss of human life, and compensation for these people, because very quickly we move on, right? And no one holds the government accountable, right? They've lost lives. What's going to happen? You know, do the families get any recompense? Right, and also pointing out the fact that a school is a sanctuary, right? It's a place where kids should be eager to go to, right? To have buildings collapse in this way is an attack on education.
Yes, and human life.
And clearly, but even in the psyche and the mind of the kids. I don't know how you realize children nowadays are a lot more aware. You know, little things.
Yes.
Even an adult who would want to go into a building, you hear a school collapsed in such and such a place. That's something that's a story that can stay in the mind and memory of a child and not want that child to go to school, right? These are important things, but we never. Bottom line, SERAP is saying, let's count the human cost, and we rarely do that. Let's remember that there's human cost at the bottom of this, and above all, hold people accountable.
Yes.
Right? Above all, hold people accountable. That's another thing that we don't do. There's been no mention in the collapse, like was mentioned, knee-jerk reaction. Bringing down all the buildings around. What about the people who should have? If you had seen that building before it came down, that building was literally suspending on air. The school was literally. I mean, it was clear that thing wasn't well grounded. Yeah. So, what about the people who are responsible?
Real people, not just numbers. Thank you, Tunde. Let's move on to the next story. Lagos, you're listening to Freshly Pressed 91 Smooth 98.1. From the Punch newspaper, the headline reads, Runoffs, Buhari won't change results to favour you. Presidency wants APC candidates. They say in the rerun of the elections that will happen this Saturday that the presidency is not going to go against the constitution to use his powers to influence INEC in any way. Sort of just calling them to order to make sure that first they act right, and second they desist from using inflammatory comments that would incite the public. To your thoughts on this?
Yeah, while I personally believe that this precisely Buhari is not going to bother about anybody, really, that's true. Go and face your struggle,
He's for
face
everyone
your
and
own
for no
everything.
one.
Do you understand? That said, even if he intended to, what do you expect him to say? Please. That yes, I will meddle and I will interfere with the elections against the constitution. Of course not. This is expected, and this is what he should say. And it's all right and proper. And they say, even though past presidents, telling on the inner group that even though past presidents have interfered, that his presidency is not going to interfere, and it's against the constitution. Remember when how this ties into the ordering of elections, when the country was collectively gesticulating and as
trying to
move the order of
apply pressure
on the order of
make
elections.
Presidency come after
Yes, if that happened, obviously, there would have been more presidential influence and oversight down the line. Now that the presidency is out of the gate, sort yourselves out.
It seems as though there's been pressure, from the parties really asking the president to weigh in.
Yeah, but that's it. It's not Buhari. It's not Buhari's. Well, at least he's created a good brand and image and impression for us to all generally believe that he's not going to.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Tunde. Let's move on to Cheta for the next story. Now, this day newspaper has this headline: Falana asks INEC to deregister 81 political parties for poor performance, and that is coming in from this newspaper. The human rights lawyer and senior advocate of Nigeria, he does not mean his words, and he's calling on INEC to exercise his power to restore the agency following the 2017 constitutional amendment. Cheta, your thoughts on this, please?
I agree with him. In short, I don't even think that he goes far enough. I think that these mushroom parties should be lined up and flogged thoroughly.
You should collect the money that they give them. The money we give them, you should collect it back.
Cheta, we say no to violence, no flogging, please.
Flogging is not violence.
Road and spoil.
Yeah.
Let's look at some numbers. In 2015, President Buhari had 15.4 million votes. Former President Jonathan had 12.9 million votes. All the other candidates on the ballot combined had 310,000, and the number of invalid votes was 845,000. In 2019, President Buhari has 15.2 million votes. Candidate Atiku Abubakar had 11.3 million. All the other candidates combined had 870,000, while the number of invalid votes was 1.3 million. For 2 election cycles in a row, at least, we have had more people who don't know how to vote properly than all the other candidates combined could put together. Now, if we remove Felix Nicholas of the PCP, and I remove he was one who came third in the 2019 elections, and I'm singling him out because the PCP is remarkably similar to PDP, and their logo is remarkably similar. So it is entirely
plausible,
if not necessary, that some people were voted for them by mistake. So if we remove him from all the other candidates, it means that all the other candidates combined had 760,000 votes. Again, way less than the number of invalid votes. And considering that, I mean, I'm one of those that follows these things closely. I had certainly not heard of him before election day. I doubt that anybody here had. If you had, please raise your hand. Now, the third party people that we had heard of, people like Melafia, Sowore, Mogalu, Durotue, had 98,000, 34,000, 22,000, and 17,000 votes respectively. That's a damning statistic.
Nationwide,
yes. It's a very damning statistic. It tells you that, and this is an argument I have been making, our politics is binary, and it's binary because we have adopted the American style winner takes all. I mean, look at Benga Daniel looking to join APC through the back
overnight, after
being Director General of the Atiku campaign. It's a symptom of that American style winner takes all approach that we have adopted. If tomorrow PDP becomes president, produces president, you will see everybody rushing to get into PDP. We need, number one, we need to accept that, okay, given the system we are running, it is 2 parties, and that's the way it's going to be. So all these mushroom parties should be deregistered. People just use them as vehicles to get money,
to collect Nigeria's money.
Number 2, we need to put safeguards to ensure it. See, democracy is supposed to be, let minority have their say, but let majority have their way. So majority have said Buhari should continue for a second term. That's fine. But the minority should be left in a party in order to build an opposition, because you cannot have a democracy without opposition. And when you keep having this mushroom thing of people,
we have migration, we have migrations,
you can't build an opposition.
And something interesting I was just missing over was, if imagine, you know how it is that you apply to work in a company and part of the contract states that after you resign from that company, you probably not work with any related company within 6 months or a year. Imagine that is applied to the political system. But let's move on.
Violation of rights.
That's a good one.
I'm going to say violation of rights. I mean,
all right. New Telegraph has this next story. While we'll quickly run through this. Over 24 Ikoyi prison inmates to sit for UTME. Cherry news?
Cherry news. Good way to end the yeah, it's cherry news. I guess some of the things they should also do now is to work with the open university systems to see how they can get some of these inmates
access to education from
the prisons, because you use the internet and quite a number of things. But it's good to actually understand that Nigeria is trying to rehabilitate its offenders and maybe just come.
Did the story say what the prisons did? I've visited these prisons and I've seen these guys. This is usually down to the personal efforts of the prisoners themselves and self-organizing.
Well,
so let's give the credit where the credit is due.
Which is good. Thank you, gentlemen. Oludimi Adewale on what's on YouTube. Oludimi Adewale Kimbogun says, on collapsed building, Itafaji is my childhood area. The fact that we Nigerians contributed a lot to most of the collapsed buildings in the sense that we see things and we do not talk. If someone does it, and it becomes hatred. We should be more mindful.
All right. Well, Chigozie Lazarus from Yanukwaja says the president saying that he's not going to meddle into the supplementary election is expected, but do we know what happens at the back? Meanwhile, I support the idea of abolishing all these mushroom political parties, leaving only at most 4.
That's true. Lagos, special thanks to you who listened and tuned in to Smooth 98.1. And a very special thanks to our analysts who stepped in this morning.
Thank you very much, Uade at Ring Niger 2017, Tunde Okufi at Big Hoofs on Twitter, and Cheta Nwaeze at Cheta. Thank you so much. And thank you, Lagos. We'll be back again 8:15, but we're still here. We have fantastic music for you. And then at 8:15, Tega is here in the locker room to give us all the gist from the sporting world over the weekend.